Hello my friends, welcome to my corner and happy Valentine's Day. Today I would like to share with you some ideas on the most important book that I have read on the topic of love, The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm. I read this book for the first time many years ago, and it just so happened to be right after a breakup that I experienced. I did not plan it that way, that's just the way it happened. And I remember thinking, wow, I would have saved myself so much trouble and so much heartbreak if I had read this book before going into any kind of relationship. So, my friend, I want to save you some trouble and some heartbreak if I can. So I'm going to do that by recommending to you very strongly this book, The Art of Loving. That's how I'm going to start this video. So let me tell you a little bit about some important concepts that can be found here. First of all, The Art of Loving was published in the year 1956, so that means that it was published exactly 70 years ago. It is a very short book, just 120 pages, you can tell, but it is just packed with insight. And insight not only about love, but about philosophy, about religion, about economics, politics, you name it. This is one of those books that seem to be directly about life. It is divided into 4 parts, so let me tell you the titles of those. Is Love and Art? The Theory of Love, Love and its Disintegration in Contemporary Western Society, and finally, The Practice of Love. Now let me tell you, the second part, The Theory of Love, that is the longest one by far. And it is subdivided into other sections. We have 3 sections. First, Love, the Answer to the Problem of Human Existence. Second, Love between Parent and Child. And third, The Objects of Love, which is in turn subdivided into brotherly love, motherly love, erotic love, self-love, and love of God. This is one of those books that, once read, it gives you the feeling that you are much better equipped to live your life, to enjoy life, to make the most of it. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to explore this book with you in particular, and especially on a day like today. We're going to start first with the problem. Okay, and what is the problem? Well, primarily the problem is that there are several misconceptions about love. According to Erich Fromm, the problem is that many people seem to think that we are born knowing how to love. You could say, of course, that we are born with the ability or with the capacity to love, but knowing how to love is a different thing, because if love is an art, then it goes with that it requires the knowledge of some kind of theory, then practice, and also a commitment to the mastery of that art, right? So that is something that goes with the territory. It seems that most people seem to think that it is all about being loved or being lovable, instead of about loving. So it's kind of like a receiving end type of thing. And because of that, people pursue the things that, according to our society, according to our standards, make them lovable. And this was written in 1956, so you have to keep that in mind. Erich Fromm says that, for example, men would pursue a notion of success, maybe material success, like a good position in a company, a good job, a job that pays, etc. Whereas women would pursue some kind of physical attractiveness, right? Some kind of standard of beauty. These days, I don't think that has changed in terms of the things that people pursue. It's just that it has changed in terms of the gender roles. But for the most part, people, men and women, they pursue success, and they pursue also some kind of ideal of beauty or attractiveness. And another issue that stems from the general problem of our perception of love is this idea that many times, and I include myself here, at least at some point in my life, we seem to confuse falling in love with staying in love or standing in love, as Erich Fromm puts it. In other words, on the one hand, you have something like a crush, something that just happens to you, an overpowering feeling that this person is amazing, and all that goes with that. But on the other hand, you have the real thing, which is something that has to last, hopefully for a very long time, forever, for the rest of your lives, however you want to look at it. Now, regarding the meaning of love, we have several definitions of love throughout the book. Fromm gives us the definition of love in snippets, if you will. But there are many good points that he makes here. For example, on page 19, he says that mature love is union under the condition of preserving one's integrity, one's individuality. In other words, two become one, but they remain two, right? So it's like a paradox, like so many good things in life. And then elsewhere, if you go a little bit farther than that, on page 43, he says, love is not primarily a relationship to a specific person. It is an attitude, an orientation of character which determines the relatedness of a person to the world as a whole, not toward one object of love. And here's also part of the problem, you know, the problem here being that many people seem to think that love is all about finding the right person. When I find that right person, I'm going to be able to love and I will become an expert in the art of loving, right? Everything will take care of itself when I find that person that is the right person for me to love. And when it comes to this, Erich Fromm gives a wonderful analogy. He says that is the equivalent of somebody thinking, I want to paint, right? And I am not making any effort in order to be a good painter or even to be a painter, period. But I think when I find the right thing to paint, I'm going to be able to paint beautifully, right? And you can translate that to any kind of art. Like, let's say I knew nothing about playing the guitar. I know how to play the guitar a little bit, but not very good. And I thought, well, the guitar is there. I haven't even touched it. But when I find the right song, I'm just going to grab the guitar and I'm going to play it wonderfully. And of course, you know, when you think about it that way, it doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't really make any sense to think that way. And yet, many times, our attitude towards love is that. It's like, oh, when the right person comes, everything will be fine, right? So that's a wonderful analogy that he has. And to complete this idea of the meaning of love, let me share with you what he says are the elements, the things that are necessary to love. There are 4 of them. Many things here come in 4s, okay? Care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. So those are the elements that you need for the formula. Let's put it that way. He also talks on in the third part of the book about the crisis of love in our society. And of course, you know, he uses the term Western society, which has come to be problematic, I believe. But we know what that means. You know, this is 1956. He's talking about Western society. And he says that also in other books, you know, by him, he explores the connection that exists between the way that we approach our socio-economic system and the way that we approach love. For example, in this case, he says there's a link between capitalism, between consumerism, if you want to put it together, consumer capitalism, and the way that we connect with each other. So he points out that the rules of the market, right, the rules that shape the way that we approach consumer goods, have a tendency to also shape the way that we interact with each other, right? So I think at this point, if you look around, right, it's not an exaggeration to say that many people actually consume other people just as they consume goods. There is an objectification of the human being that is going on, and that is part of the problem. It's a very big part of the problem. And this happens, of course, on the part of men and also of women, right? We tend to think of men as objectifying women, and maybe that is more prevalent. We don't really know how to measure that. But it is true on both sides, that objectification. And according to Fromm, it's very simple. Our way of life is simply not conducive to love. And you realize that immaturity when it comes to love has become the norm. You know, it's not an exception, it's just the norm. And that is one of the reasons why I believe this book is so important, and probably the reason why Fromm wrote this book in the first place. So in the final part of the book, he talks about the practice of love, right? So the question here could be, how do we master the art of loving? He says that in order to master any art, so this is general, right? There are 4 things that you need: discipline, concentration, patience, and what he calls supreme concern. Let me tell you a little bit more about that one, because I think, you know, discipline, concentration, and patience are obvious. If you want to play the guitar, learn how to play the guitar, or how to paint, you obviously need those things. But by supreme concern, he means that the mastery of this art is a very, very important, I'm not going to say the most important, but one of the most important things in your life. So that is the concern right there for the art. You realize that this is something important. It's important to you, and you want to make the most of it. Now that is general, right? So if we want to master the art of loving, here's what we need. Also 4 points. The first one is to overcome our narcissism. Okay, that seems common sense, but you know, it's easier said than done, right? Because all of us have that element of individualism. It's part of our, you know, our survival instinct, and we have that narcissism. And the idea here is to overcome it, to dilute our ego a little bit. Fromm says that the opposite of narcissism is objectivity. We have sometimes a completely subjective viewpoint. Sometimes when we judge ourselves or when we evaluate the things that we do or the way that we act, we are subjective. Some people tend to give themselves a break. Other people tend to be too harsh or too hard on themselves. But it's always that subjectivity, and in order to overcome that, we need that objectivity. But once again, it's difficult. It's difficult. Many times we approach life as if this were some kind of a novel, and I am the protagonist, right? And everybody's thinking the same thing. This is a novel, and I am the protagonist, because of course we see things from our perspective. We see things as we are. But that is one of the elements that he says we need to put there into the formula: overcome our narcissism. Number two is faith. Okay, and this is a very interesting choice of word, because when you say faith, people think a certain thing. It's kind of like we're already predisposed in a way to think about God, etc. But what he means here is faith in oneself. In other words, the conviction that there are certain fundamental attitudes, right? Fundamental values, if you will, that are going to remain the same in our personality. Okay, so there's that fundamental attitudes means something like a foundation, right? That you have a foundation in terms of who you are. If you cannot have that faith in yourself, then how are you going to be faithful to other people? If you don't know who you are, right? If you do not have that foundation, how are you going to have faith in other people? So that's what he means by faith. Then he also mentions, this is number three, activity. And I take that to mean that love has to be something active, not something passive, right? I cannot just sit here and just wait and expect for people to love me, just like that. You know what I'm saying, right? It has to be an active thing, not passive. That's number three. And finally, number four is fairness. Okay, fairness in the sense that love has to be a win-win situation. And I hate to use some kind of, economic metaphor here, but you know how it is. When I buy a book, I spend a certain amount of money on it, and I expect certain things from it, a certain quality, right? A certain condition, and all that kind of stuff. If I buy a new book for, this was $13.99, and I get a book that is clearly used, I'm not happy. That's not a win-win situation. I paid a price and I got something that is not really fair for me. So the same thing, but translated, of course, to the much more important area of love. It has to be win-win. It has to be good for both sides involved, or more than both, more than two, if you're talking about a different kind of love. I think the world needs to read this book. I think this is necessary. It's a necessary book at this point. It really has become very difficult for us to love and to be loved. But if love is an art, and here I do agree with Erich Fromm, then the first step, of course, would be to educate ourselves on what love is and how to love, how to master this art of loving, how to love ourselves, how to love others, how to love nature, how to love God. Because it's in that order that it happens. Never believe somebody who tells you, I love God, but I don't love other people, or I don't even love myself. That's just not the way it works. It gets more complex as you go. So please, 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 if you take one recommendation from me, let it be this one. Okay, if you read one book on the crucial topic of love, make it this one. I think you're gonna thank me someday, my friend, if you haven't read it already. And why? Okay, well, why do I think this is so important? Mainly because I do believe that love is the most powerful force in the universe. It has been said many times, love conquers all. It sounds like a cliche, but sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a cliche is just the truth that has been repeated many, many times. Love is the antidote. Love is the answer. Okay, and if you have experienced love, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I remember, and I always share this with everybody that I talk to, the first time that I experienced love in the romantic sense. Okay, so I had experienced other forms of love before, of course, but the first time that I experienced romantic love, it utterly transformed me. Okay, it transformed my perspective. It changed my life completely, even though eventually, I realized that the girl didn't really love me. But that doesn't matter. That's her problem. What matters here is that I had that experience. I could experience the transforming power of love. It changed my life. It helped me to see everything clearly. And I have that. I have that experience. I know how powerful it is. And that's why I continue to seek that experience and that insight, that perspective into things, that viewpoint. if you will. So that is one of the many reasons why I wanted to share my ideas on this very important book, one of the most important books that I have ever read with you, especially on this very special day. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? You know that I am always happy to hear them. Those are my 2 cents on The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by. Have a wonderful day, and never, never stop loving.